Well, hi everyone, and a warm welcome back. Before getting started with today's video, I'd just like to say a couple of thank yous. First of all, to the patrons of the channel who are good enough each month to make a small donation to help keep the channel going. So a really big thank you to you. It really is appreciated, and your names will appear at the beginning or end of this video. Secondly, I also want to say a really big thank you to Tyler from Canada. Now, Tyler actually entered today's video as part of the competition for people all around the world. And because of this never-ending, ridiculous COVID lockdown, there doesn't seem to be an end to the lockdown and when I may be able to get out and do this video. Now, a lot of people have requested this, and I also felt that it was a really important video to do. So Tyler's agreed to let us do the video here and still enter the video as a competition entry when the final voting starts. If his video gets voted as the #1 video, then I will still fly out to see him in Canada. We'll do perhaps something else on his car, and if he doesn't need anything done to his car, then I'll make a cash contribution to him as being the winning entry. So thanks to you, Tyler. We'll try and get this video done today, and hopefully people will make good use of it. So today's video is all about the removal of the fuel pump and sender unit, which is mounted in the fuel tank. We're going to look at that in a second. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So let's first of all have a look at how the system works. Now, I appreciate most of you are not mechanics, just the same as me, and you should bear that in mind if you're thinking of watching this video and doing things the way I've shown you. It is quite an important thing to do, and can easily go wrong if it's not done right. So if at any point during this video you think I'm not doing it the correct way, please seek professional advice. I am not a professional mechanic. So the fuel tank, we'll start at the fuel tank end. We've got one out of the car here, and this is pretty much the basic setup of the fuel system. I've not included all the finer details, just the basics. So we have a fuel tank mounted underneath the back of the car. When you fill up your car with gas, it goes in through this pipe here and fills up the tank inside. We then need a method of getting the fuel from the tank to the engine, and that's done by the fuel pump, which is mounted on the sender unit. Also mounted on here is the sender itself. When electricity is sent through to the pump, the electric motor pumps the fuel down this line. It comes all the way along, and this is the actual line out of the car. It's hard to believe this is actually the length of the car, and it doesn't include the full length because you've still got the front of the car with the engine, and you've still got the rear bumper at the other end. So it's amazing how long this is when it's outside of the car. It comes along until it reaches the fuel filter. It goes through a very simple fuel filter up to your fuel rails, which supply fuel to your injectors. When the ECU sends the right pulses to the injectors for them to open, the fuel is then allowed to enter the engine at the right timing in order to fire when the spark fires. Any excess fuel, too much pressure, is regulated here. That then allows the excess fuel to travel back down the smaller line all the way back to your fuel tank, where it's then pumped all the way back round again, and it's a continuous cycle of fuel going back and forth, one under pressure, one is excess going back into the tank. So it is quite a simple system, and this system has been in use now for, well, as long as I can remember. Certainly for the last 40 or 50 years they've used this method of pumping fuel to the engine. So that's a very basic look at it. There are certain other things like breather pipes and other bits and pieces, but I don't want to make it too complex. These videos are for the man at home. So that's a look at the system and how it works. We've got an awful lot to cover today. I'm going to try my hardest to make sure I cover everything in as much detail as possible. I may well forget things, I may have to follow up in another video, but you're certainly going to get the basics today. So, removal of the fuel pump assembly with the sender. This is a really contentious issue, and I know that by doing this video I'm going to be upsetting some people, because some people have ideas on how they think this should be done. Some of those ideas I disagree with, and for every single job we do on these cars you should always start with what the manual says. If for some reason you can't do what the manual says, then you find another way. But some of the methods I've seen have been absolutely horrendous and scary, and I would never tell anyone to do some of those methods. I'm going to ask Mitch when he edits this video to perhaps find a few pictures of what other people have done that I disagree with and put those pictures on there. I'm sorry if it's you, I'm sorry if it's your car, but I've got a real passion for these cars and I like things to be done properly and neatly and returned to their original factory specification. So I've got 5 methods here that I've seen done on these cars. We're going to look at each one and why I think it shouldn't be done. The first method is by dropping the fuel tank. Now there's a number of reasons I don't like the idea of dropping the fuel tank. You can do it this way, especially if you're in a garage with a good ramp to get the car up nice and high. But the problems I have with it is this video is for the man at home, or mechanic at home I should say, male or female, I want to be politically correct. Most people at home do not have ramps that will go very high. As you will see, the fuel pump assembly does not come straight out, so lowering the tank will not allow you to pull that out. You're going to have to manipulate the tank at all different angles. That means you need a good area to work in, certainly high enough to get underneath and take the weight of the tank and maneuver it. Secondly, you're going to need help from someone else. One person's going to need to hold the assembly while someone else manipulates the tank. Also, you've got a number of other pipes connected to the tank that I've not shown, and they have very, very short lengths on them. So you're going to need, again, an extra pair of hands in order to try and disconnect those pipes while lowering a heavy tank, especially if it's got fuel in. Now you are able to drain the tank. There is a drain screw, and I can't remember. So if you need to drain your fuel, you can do that. Will make things a bit lighter, but it is still quite a bulky item to move. So that is not one of my first choices. However, it is one that you could use if you think that you have the right access and that's the way you want to do it. Option 2, I've seen on the internet. I've only seen it once. It scared me so much I couldn't even watch the rest of the video, where someone cut the floor in the trunk of the car in order to gain access to this bit of pipe work at the end here. Please, please don't go cutting the bodywork of your car to get this out. It's not necessary. So that's not my option. I don't agree with it. Third option I've seen is cutting the fuel line at the pump. This piece of pipe here. Again, I don't like this option because when they're rejoining the pipe, they're using just a piece of rubber hose and a couple of Jubilee clips. This is a very high pressure line. I've seen a number of people use that method. I've even seen people join it with garden watering hose. That is not what garden watering hose is for. It will leak, if not right then, certainly in the future, and there's a high risk of your car catching fire. There are other ways of joining it, but I ask the question, why would you want to cut it there and join it? The next option is to cut the hose. Now this is actually a good option, especially if you've got a lot of rust which is causing you problems with disconnecting the pipes. If you want to cut the hose, this is one of my preferred options if option 5 doesn't work. And option 5, of course, is the one that Mitsubishi tell us in the manual. Now, a lot of people have said there is no way of getting this out without cutting the hose. That is not true. The manual tells you the correct way to do it. It does work. Right, now before we move on, I'm going to explain why people have trouble getting this undone. I didn't bring an extra piece of hose, so I'm going to have to come back on the problem. In an ideal world, we would all like to disconnect it here and take the pump out nice and simple. This type of hose does not have a swivel head, which you would expect, and it also doesn't swivel on the pump side. So that means when you undo this, it's going to force the rubber hose to turn, and the rubber hose, instead of coming undone at this end, is going to try to tighten up even further, which it can't do. In which case, what's then going to happen is it's going to turn, or attempt to turn, this metal pipe. And all that's going to happen then is you're going to snap the metal pipe here. So you cannot undo it at the pump end, no matter how you try. The correct way to get this piece of rubber hose off is at this end first. This end does swivel, this piece does not. So you would lock this with your spanner or mole grips, and then you would turn this one, a simple swivel connection. Once that one's undone, there's no risk of damaging this hose. You're still left with this end, but now this isn't a problem, because now you can grip here, turn here, the hose will turn, but it's not connected to anything, so it doesn't matter. Hose is out the way, you can now get your fuel sender and pump out. Now this is a bit tricky, and it's another reason why I said to you, going out of lowering the tank and taking it out is not really a good option. You can see the pump doesn't come out straight. You've got a number of bits in the way, so you've got to carefully work this, see what's getting trapped, maneuver it out bit by bit, being careful not to cut any of the wires or break anything on the way out. You'll reach a certain point, at which point it then has to tilt. And you can see how difficult that would be to maneuver a tank while trying to work that out like so. This way, no damage at all, not a single penny needs to be spent. So that's my preferred option. Now there are going to be occasions, and I've already looked at the car we're going to do this job on, and it is one of those occasions where, because of water splashing up onto this pipe, this nut has become completely rusted and fused onto the pipe, and I promise you that should swivel normally. But if it has become rusted, do not attempt to force it, because all that's going to happen is you'll snap this pipe. It's an expensive piece of pipe to replace and an awful lot of work, or alternatively you're going to snap it at this end. This piece of pipe here is not a solid tube, it is wrapped tube. So they take a solid piece of metal, flat metal, they fold it around and then join along the seam. But that seam is incredibly weak, and if you twist this in any way at all, it will break that seam, and then the sender becomes worthless. I'm going to show you a couple of pumps here that I've brought out from other cars, from jobs people have done. All of these have needed replacing, because they're cars that I've bought that have come in and they're pretty much trashed it. So option one, you can see they've tried undoing this, snapped the pipe there and tried re-welding it, re-soldering it, whatever, not very successfully. So that was a write-off given the high pressure. This one, they tried fitting a bigger pump. I don't know why they didn't get the right pump. It's done the job for 30 years, but they bought an aftermarket pump and tried joining that with hose. That didn't work too successfully either, and now we can't even fit a standard pump to it. The next one, they twisted it so much it completely snapped the pipe out of there, so that's a write-off.
And ran a standard bit of hose directly off the pump, I thought.
Ah, that's right, yeah, my apologies. Yeah, they had a standard piece of rubber hose. They drilled out the old pipe, ran a bit of hose down to the pump. If any of these are you, please hide your head in shame. And the final one is the one I see most of all, where people cut the metal pipe. You can see it started to twist up there where they've tried to do things. This is not my option. I've seen this. This is probably the number one thing people do. I don't see the point to it when we can undo it properly. So, yeah, back to this. If for any reason that is seized on there, do not force it, do not attempt to do anything with it. Go straight up to this end. From the car side, from inside, you'll be able to just about get to this piece of hose here. Cut through the hose. You can easily get a replacement hose. Now you can either order the genuine Mitsubishi one, which I don't use because it hasn't got the swivel head and it causes a problem. Option 2, I go along to the local hydraulics place. They make up a replacement hose, but they put a nice swivel head on it for me. So that's easy enough to just reconnect everything. Really, really simple. All right, normally really simple. I hope I picked up the right one. Yeah, there we go. Really simple. Reconnect it all in. That cost £20 for that piece of hose. A damn sight lot cheaper than replacing the entire sender unit, which I think is like £400–600. Crazy money. But a nice simple hose, job done easy. So today we're going to look at two methods. First one is replacing it as per the factory, which I'm pretty sure won't work because the pipes on this are pretty rusted. And if we can't get it out today, then we'll show the hose cutting and get it out that way. So I think that's covered everything. I've shown you some pumps. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So a quick look at the tools. I think we don't need to cut the video at this point. We can just go straight over there and save a bit of time because it's a very long video today. So some tools. I hope this is everything we need. I might have to change the plan as we go along. So number one, a rag. You're going to have to release any pressure left in the line. There's a couple of methods of doing that. I'll show you both methods in a minute, but you're going to need some rag for that. Lots and lots of, what do I call it? No, what's the... To unseize rusted stuff. Penetrating fluid, that's what you're going to need. This is your regular brand stuff that I put in my own bottle because I buy it in bulk. But any penetrating fluid that will help to release anything that's rusted, grab yourself a bottle of that. A wire brush, if your tank area is a bit corroded, it's easier to clean as much rust off the threads as possible before you try undoing the bolts. Nice wire brush for that. Ideally with brass bristles, so there's less chance of a spark. Then we're going to need, I like to use 2 pairs of mole grips. A couple of these bolts are going to be really tight and the spanners keep slipping. Good quality mole grips will help with that problem. If you choose, you can use a spanner or 2 spanners. One is 19mm, the other one is 14mm. Phillips screwdriver. A pick tool, I can't remember why I've got that. A wrench with 10mm, 8mm and an extension. And finally some thread lock. When you put this back together, you don't ever want those nuts coming undone by vibration or over time. You want the tiniest spot of removable thread lock. Do not use permanent thread lock because you will never get it undone again. They do a temporary thread lock that will hold it in place, stop any problems. And if you're going to go down the replacement hose route, get yourself the hose as well. Get off the old one, take it to a local hydraulics place. They'll make you up a new one to the right length, but with swivel heads on it that make the job so much easier. So I think I've covered about everything there. We'd better go and look at the car. Now before starting this job, there's something we need to consider, and that is the possibility that there is still high pressure fuel left inside the lines. And if your fuel system is all fine, then there will be some pressure left in your fuel line. We need to release that pressure because we're going to be working around here. We don't want high pressure gasoline flying out and hitting us in the eye. There's 2 methods of releasing the pressure. First method is to disconnect the fuel pump, the electric supply to the fuel pump, and then start the engine. It will fire up initially, it'll run for a few seconds, and then when it runs out of pressure, it will stall. At the point that it's stalled, you know that any fuel pressure has been released from the line. In order to do that, we start by removing the cover, which covers the fuel sender unit. Now this is a car that I bought from Michelle. For those of you that are new to this channel, you've probably seen this in 1 or 2 videos now. Michelle had an unfortunate accident in this car. So I bought it off her. She did it at a nice price so that the people on the YouTube channel can get to see the processes that we are going to be filming without me damaging any of my cars. So you'll need to remove your spare wheel and the tool holder on this side. Those are covered in another video, so because we're filming for so long today, we're not going to show that bit. You can just refer to a previous video. You need access to this hatch here, which is held on by 4 simple Phillips screws. So here's our access hatch, and many of you, especially those in wet climates, are going to see something very similar to this with lots and lots of rust. It is a major problem here, especially if you need to remove this unit, because these bolts all seize up and you end up with a nightmare. Now this is probably the point where you want to grab your penetrating oil and give this a really good soaking, and you might even want to do this over a day or two period if your area is looking anything like this. Now we can unclip this filter here. Normally just slides up that rail there. This one's been broken, which I expect with age, and here is the plug to your electric pump. You've got a little clip on the top which you push down and then pull it apart to disconnect it. At this point the electric pump will not function. So assuming there is fuel in your line, you start your engine and you'll leave it running until the engine stalls. When the engine stalls, you turn off your ignition and then we're ready to continue with the job. That's option 1, and it assumes that the pump is working or there is pressure in the line already. If this method doesn't work for some reason, perhaps your pump itself is faulty and therefore you can't do any of this test, then we can do stuff from the other end to be sure. So let's go to the engine end. Okay, this is option 2 at this end, and this assumes that for some reason you can't start your car. Maybe you've got a flat battery or something else that is stopping you starting your car to release that pressure. We're able to manually release it from this end. Where the pipe goes into your fuel rail at the front, this is your high pressure line, and all you need to do is undo 3 bolts. The first one is here. It's the same for turbo and non-turbo models, as long as you've got the double overhead cam, or in fact even the single overhead I believe has the same 2 rails. Bolt 1. Second one is here. And then the third one down the bottom there. These are 10mm bolts, or 10mm head on the bolt, so you need your 10mm wrench. Just watch you don't drop your bolts into the engine. Have a finger there to catch them. And this is where your rag comes in. Now, as long as your engine isn't really hot, any fuel that pours out onto your engine is not necessarily a problem. It will vaporize, but just to help keep things clean and tidy, get some rag in there if you can. And then we're going to be working this out of the fuel rail. Now it's going to be very tight. In fact, I'm going to make things just a little easier. We're just going to remove one other part just here. Just gives us a little bit more leverage. Now this car isn't partly stripped down for any reason other than Michelle stripped it down before I picked it up from her. So anything else that you see removed from here, you don't need to remove. You just need to take off the few screws that I've shown you and then gently work it out of the system. Watch your eyes in case it sprays up into your face. How are we doing now? Oh, it's nearly out. You see it separating. There we go. And you see fuel pouring out there. I didn't do a very good job at catching most of that. So now we can be sure that there is no fuel or no fuel pressure left in the line, and it's safe to do whatever we want with it. Once that pressure's released, you can plug that back in, do up all your bolts and everything so you don't have fuel constantly leaking out.
Or muck getting in.
Or muck getting in, far more important. I'm not going to spend any more time putting that back together at this very moment because it's not relevant to what we're doing. Just remember to bolt it all back in as it was. One other thing, actually, before you push that back in, just be very cautious. It's worth spraying a little bit of penetrating oil on the rubber ring because some of them are a little bit tight, and sometimes people nip them as they're putting it in. Just split the rubber slightly and then you get fuel leaks. So if it doesn't go in really easily, just put a little piece of something to lubricate it and it'll slide in fine. Now we're back to the back of the car. Now for the next part, it might make life a lot easier if you jack your car as high as you can possibly get it. Make sure you have the proper safety precautions in the place, and then remove the wheel on the right hand side of the car. If you're sitting in the car, it's on the right hand side.
Assuming you're right hand drive.
No, it's still the right if you're sitting in the car. It's always on the right. Okay, that's going to give you better access. You're also going to notice that the strut and a part of the exhaust and stuff are missing from this car. It's not actually needed to remove those. It's only the wheel that would give you better access. The other parts have been removed by Michelle before I picked up the car from her.
We removed the strut.
Strut we might have done, but the exhaust wasn't. So the part you're looking to get to is just under here. It's the first pipe that you see in a row of, is it 2 or 3 pipes? 2 pipes. So it's the one nearest to you with the nut on the end. Okay, and we're going to need to separate it. Your rubber hose is on this side, your metal high pressure line is on the other side. Now I would strongly recommend that you do this next part with mole grips. It will give you a much better grip on those nuts. And what you need to do is the one on the right hand side, you put the mole grip up against the body of your car so it doesn't turn anywhere, it just holds the nut in place. Just adjust this. The second set of mole grips you put on the nut on the rubber hose, and you're going to put that one further down. Find yourself a good place to get it. Now these are going to be incredibly tight, really tight. And one of the things I like to do now is actually get these two close together and then pull the two together. It gives you 2 hands worth of strength to undo them. But what you want to do is make sure the one on the right is up against the bodywork, because you don't want that to turn in any way at all. If that pipe is rusted, allowing it to turn will break the pipe. So we only want the rubber side to move at this point. So get the two in your hands, give it as much force as you can. I think that moved. Just loosen it and try again. No, it's still, now it's moving. Yep, that seems to be a bit looser. I think we're rubbing up against this other one slightly. There we go. That's definitely gone. Now that's loose, we're able to see if the nut has become fused onto the metal hose. If that is fused, and I'm pretty sure this one was, I did put some penetrating fluid on it the other day to see if it will loosen up. But if that does not move freely on the hose, assume it is seized. And if that's the case, we now have to go to option 2 of cutting the rubber hose. Now while you're here, you may as well cut it at this end first, just to make life a bit easier. You've got 2 options. You can either try and get a knife in there, or I like to use a nice pair of cutters. You can get right up there onto that hose and cut through it. And remember, this is a nice cheap option and doesn't do any damage. Now we can unscrew, hopefully, the rest of that nut, which is a bit seized. Luckily you don't have to do this job very often. I'm just going to lock that on there so we don't risk damaging anything. Back on the nut. It really is tight.
You're lucky that's an outdoor light. Fuel leak about it.
That's gone really tight again. Come on. Just worried about breaking the metal line. That's the one we really need to keep hold of. Now you might say, why don't you use spanners on the nuts? You're only going to get an open end spanner on there, and the problem with open end is they tend to slip when it's something that's really tight. So I prefer mole grips. You can get some really good grip on there, much better than an open-ended spanner. Well, I've never known one to be this tight once you've, thank you, once you've cracked the seal. They normally come undone quite easily after that, but not this one. It's going to make me work.
Do we need to pull this apart?
Well, I just like to finish a job. Yeah, we can cut the video and come back to it. It's weird that it started off undoing with fingers and now it's quite tight, but it's coming. Okay. No, it's still too tight. Okay, so that's that end off. No damage to our main line, no real expense, and we can put it back to look like new. Now we're up the top. The next part of the process is done from inside the car. So from the access hatch, I'd strongly recommend, unless you're in a really dry climate with no rust at all, lots and lots of penetrating oil, and leave it on there you know, a good while if you can. Now I did give this a soaking the other day, so I'm hoping it's done its job. It really will save a lot of heartache because the threads on these bolts here are welded onto the tank on the other side. So if you snap any of these, you've got a real nightmare of a job to replace them. We're also going to need to get the electrical cables out the way, so bring them underneath this filter here, so we're all clear. And then you want your 8mm wrench. Really hope these do come loose. Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, it seems that it did its job. Certainly on number one. I shouldn't really be saying this until they're all out, should I?
Knowing our luck, probably not.
And there's one other thing I forgot to mention, of course. Use your wire brush, get any muck out of the way, get an air blower, make sure nothing's going to fall into your fuel tank. Even though you have a fuel filter, you don't really want muck in there if you can avoid it. That's two good ones. Three. Fantastic.
Don't say that just yet.
Now this has been soaked for a couple of days because I didn't want them breaking on video today, because then I've got to do another video on how to repair it.
I don't have time for
That's a horrible job. Yay, we got them all. Right, from this point.
Just to point out, we have not undone the one that's mounted to any cables.
Yeah, it's purely the 2, 4, 6 around the outside. Right, from this point, this should come out, but I have known quite a few of them to be seized on, and we might have to get... no, it's come. Now, there is a rubber gasket between here and the tank. Sometimes the rubber gasket becomes tight. I would also recommend that you order a new gasket, because quite often now these have all gone brittle and they shrink and all sorts. So you may not be able to use your old one. And the gasket, I can feel, is pretty much fused to the tank. Oh, it's coming, it's coming. Slowly work our way around. And once we're all clear, it will then give us better access for the next part of the process. And that is to get hold of that piece of rubber hose at this end. Now we're going to use our knife, and this is just to make the job easier for us. Watch out for your paintwork. That's the hose out the way. Now we can get the fuel pump out without any damage, hopefully. Nice and slowly.
Still draining fuel?
Yep. Oh, price of today's gas, Michelle's left about £100 worth in here. She'll be at my door tomorrow siphoning it out. There we go. So we're out. Now we're back over to the bench for the next part. Now we're on to the next part of the process. We still have the broken piece of hose to remove from here. Fairly standard stuff really. Again, I prefer the mole grips because we can't get a ring spanner onto the 14mm nut. And no matter what happens, we must not allow this to turn in any way at all. So I'm going to fix that with a pair of mole grips. Sometimes I like to put these into a vise, but I don't have a vise here. Then we get a ring spanner on this one. And as I said before, if you put the two close together like that, you can grip them with your hands. And break the seal. Now we can undo that. Still no damage at all. Now Tyler wanted to know about the removal and replacement of the fuel pump. So in this unit here, this is your fuel pump. It's a simple electric motor with a pump in it. This is your fuel sender. This is a variable resistor. As the fuel goes into the tank, it raises this float here, and in turn at the other end of this arm, it is moving the arm of the resistor to give you a different value. That in turn goes to the fuel gauge and tells you how much fuel's got in the tank, simply by going up and down. We've also got a float in here. When the fuel level drops too low, it sends a signal up this other wire back to your gauge that puts on the little fuel light to tell you that you're nearly empty. So it's a very, very simple system, really, really old technology. So replacing the motor, quite simple. Phillips screwdriver here on the bottom. These are normally incredibly tight, and if it is really tight, back to the mole grips. Rather than risk rounding off your screw, just grab it with the mole grips, and then it makes life a lot easier. No damage to your screw. Undo the screw, lift off this metal clip here. This will now allow you to tilt your pump forward and pull it out. Now don't yank it really quick because you've still got a cable attached here, or a couple of cables, so just gently work it out using your fingers like so. Now we can unplug the pump. Easy as that. Now there's two sizes of pump depending on whether you've got the turbo and the SL models, which have a larger pump, and the naturally aspirated models have a smaller pump. Both seem to fit the same, no difference there. Oh, and one quick thing, someone mentioned about how to store your car in the winter. It's a really difficult one. The one thing I would say though is if your car is dry stored, make sure it is completely dry when you store it. I don't mean no fuel at all, I mean as in make sure no moisture can get into the tank. If you're storing your car outside in the winter, then I would suggest you leave fuel in the tank, because what happens is if you're in a wet climate and you drain all the fuel out of your tank, this is what happens inside your tank. Water moisture gets in there caused by the damp in the air, and it just corrodes everything. So if it won't start after the winter, chances are if you left no fuel in there, stored outside in the cold, it's seized up all your motor and it's all rotten inside. You can see there where the fuel level was, so there is absolute proof that by leaving fuel in there it will be fine. Everything above the fuel is all corroded. So my answer, whether it's the right answer or not, is if you're leaving it in a damp in the winter, leave fuel in it. If you're putting it into dry storage, you can or cannot drain the fuel, it's up to you. The only thing with fuel, over time it starts to degrade and doesn't work so well. So when you bring your car back out in the summer, you may well find it runs a bit lumpy or whatever. Run it down to half a tank, put in fresh fuel, then run it, you know, most of your fuel out and fill it all with fresh fuel. You could also put in an additive. I noticed in the States, actually, I've not seen it here, it's probably available, but in the States you can buy an additive for the petrol that's gone old to refresh it. And you can also put additives that will clean the fuel system as well. So replacement, fairly simple. You do have an O-ring in there. If the new one won't push on nice and easy, just get yourself some sort of lubricant, either penetrating oil or some grease or something. Just very lightly put it around the top there and put your pump back in. It will work in through the rubber seal, back into place. Bring this back in. You've got a little slot there that goes into. If I haven't lost the screw, that's there. Now when you put the screw back in, make sure you do it up nice and tight. You could even use a tiny bit of thread lock, temporary thread lock, because you don't want that working loose in vibration. Oh, and I forgot to plug the cable back in. Luckily we should be able to get that round the back there. Okay, also check your other wires. I've seen these before where that wire has snapped off. I don't know why that's happened, but I've seen those snap off. Check all your other wires are secure and not damaged. So we've managed so far to remove this without any damage other than cutting the rubber hose, and the only reason to cut that rubber hose was purely because the metal hose was a bit rusted and the nut wouldn't turn on the end, but I have shown you that it should turn on the end. Now we come to refitting. For that, we're going to need our replacement hose. We're going to need some suitable spanners to fit the couplings on the end, and our wrench, and that's about it. Oh, and some thread lock. Take some thread lock with you. Right, I'll see you back at the car. Now refitting is pretty much the reverse of removal. Just a couple of things when you go to put it back together. First of all, watch for any muck. You don't want any muck getting knocked into your tank. And when you put it in, if you look into the bottom of your tank, you'll see a tray in there, which is in addition to what appears to be the inside of the tank. You need to make sure that your float drops into that tray rather than gets caught on the wall of the tray. Now I'm not taking too much care with this. This car is going to be dismantled, and we're just going to do a load of videos on it, and then it'll be going to the junkyard. So if you see me doing stuff a little bit haphazard, don't worry too much about it. Hopefully you'll take a little more care of your car. So we're going to feed this in now. Float goes in first, then we gently work in the rest of it. Now we're going to go in so far, but not all of the way just yet. I've got a cable stuck down the back here. Make sure you put your rubber gasket back on. If you need a new one, grab a new one. Okay, so from this point now, we need to put on our new hose. So we're going to slide that through. And if all goes well, this can be a little bit finicky. This is one of those jobs that you don't like to do on film because it can be a little bit tight. Yeah, very, very tight, just to be awkward. Let's see if I can do it this way just to get it started. I'm conscious that we don't want to bend anything.
Wouldn't it have been easier to put the pipe in after you've placed this in place?
No, because it tends to go under a little bit too far.
Oh.
We'll try it, we'll try it. I haven't done one of these for about a year.
Just don't drop your pipe. There you go, screw it on. Yeah.
It's just a case of catching the thread just right.
There you go.
Okay, now at this point you need a little bit of thread lock. You don't want this working loose while you're going along. Now thread lock, for some reason people think you need to cover the whole thread, and that's the worst thing you can do because you will never ever get it undone again. All you need is a tiny spot, just one spot. Now I'm not putting any on this because it's not staying in this car, but just put a tiny spot on your thread. Then when you do this up, it will go around the thread and just lock it so it doesn't work its way loose. Now once that's in place, of course, you're going to need your mole grips. Get them on the nuts. And just do those up. And you want those done up pretty darn tight so they don't work loose. Even with your thread lock, you don't want them loose. And remember not to allow this pipe to bend in any way at all. Now we can turn this into place. Line up all your bolts. I think I mentioned fitting a new gasket. Let's see if we can get all these lined up. There we go. Then we put all our nuts on. And when you tighten this down, you're going to tighten it till you feel it nip the rubber. Do not do it so tight that the sharp edges actually cut through the rubber. And you're going to do it in a star pattern, so do opposites first and work your way around. And then you'll give it a second pass. Oops, that's the final knot on there. So we can start off finger tight. the opposite, then into this one. This way we get it all down evenly. Into this one. And then to this one. And then we'll go around again, tighten them all up. Now you may have noticed that I've not tightened everything up properly, and as I said, it's purely because we're stripping this car down, so I'm just showing you the process. You can do it all properly yourself. Just want to do enough to stop any moisture getting in there. Now you can run your cable back underneath the filter. And you can plug that back in. Cable's out the way. Slide your filter back onto this piece of metal here, which is broken there. And now we can put the cover back on. There's one other thing it mentions in the manual, that you should put a sealant around here. Now I've personally not had any cars other than this one which has got tons of sealant on it. I've only ever seen them with a high density or low density foam. In fact, it looked like this originally had the high density, low density foam around the edge. So I always just replace it with foam unless it's all corroded and you're not going to get a good seal, in which case you will need to put some sort of sealant around the edge. So we get that in. Put in your 4 screws. Now I forgot to bring over the screwdriver, but I'm sure you all know how to use the screwdriver and screw that cover down to make sure no moisture gets into the car. For the final bit, we go underneath the car and, well, connect up the hose. Okay, now we're left with one end of the rubber hose and your metal pipe, and we just simply connect the two together. Just do them up. And I hope this thread catches better than the other one. It's so tight in space here. Come on, come on, come on. Okay, now as with the one at the top, we'll put a little spot of thread lock on there, temporary thread lock, non-permanent, and then finish doing up the hose. Now you probably remember how tight it was when you took it out, so you know roughly how tight you want it, which is damn tight, but don't do it so tight that you damage the thread. And that's it. That's cost us £20 for a new hose, and as I said, if you're lucky you won't need to replace the hose. It will usually undo at this end, but if your pipe's at all rusty, don't attempt to undo it at this end, just cut the hose. £20. It's taken less than an hour to do, and I think that includes filming time and all the running backwards and forwards that you don't see off camera. Job done. So for now, I want to say a big thank you to Tyler for letting us do this video now and getting it out the way. I know lots and lots of people are going to want to know how to do this. It does show that you can do it without cutting the floor pan in the trunk of the car, and you don't need to cut your pump or anything else, just a simple rubber hose, and the job's done. And again, I want to thank the patrons who've contributed towards making of the films. If you would like to become a patron, you'll see the website somewhere on the message during the video. I want to thank you all for watching and for your support. And if you would like to join the forum as well, that's up to you. It's not to compete with any other forum, as I keep on saying. It's purely to complement this channel, talk to other people that watch the channel, and you can also request a video on the forum. That is the only place you can request a video. There is a section on the forum that says request a video. Go to that category, tell me what you want, and I'll do my best to make it for you. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.